I like to tell this story. I love this story, in fact, about the lion who liked to remind everyone in the jungle how great he was. One day, the lion was going through the jungle and he met the gazelle and he roared with a mighty roar, "Who's the king of the jungle?" And the gazelle, trembling, said, "Well, Mr. Lion, you're the king of the jungle." Later on, he found a giraffe along the way, and he roared the big roar and asked the giraffe, "Giraffe, who's the king of the jungle?" And the giraffe, trembling and shaking in his boots, said, "Why, mighty lion, you're the king of the jungle." Next, he ran across a monkey, and he roared again, "Monkey, who's the king of the jungle?" The monkey, trembling in his boots, said, "Well, mighty lion, you know that you're the king of the jungle." Well, finally, he ran across the elephant, and he roared that mighty roar, and he asked the elephant, "Who's the king of the jungle?" And before he could even get that final word out of his mouth, the elephant snatched him up with his trunk, lifted him in the air, swirled him around a few times, beat him on the ground, threw him off to the side, and he hit a large boulder. Dazed and confused, the lion just simply said, "Well, if you don't know the answer, you don't have to take it so personal." If you don't know the answer. In our text today, in the very beginning part of the verses, Jesus is predicting what's going to happen when he gets to Jerusalem. He's going to be arrested and mocked and beaten and all these other things, and then he's going to die, and then on the third day he's going to be raised up again. And the disciples have no clue what he's talking about. In fact, they just act like Jesus didn't say anything. The scriptures say that they didn't understand what he was saying, and they were afraid to ask what he meant. I wonder about us in our faith. I mean, faith is not something that we possess once and for all. It's not something that we just get and then we have it for all the times. Faith is a journey, isn't it? It's a journey that, as I like to say in some messages, it's a journey without maps. We're not quite sure where we're going to go. We have lots of questions, but we don't have all the answers. It's a walk in which we walk by trusting in God and God's goodness and God's grace and God's love for us, and not by what we can see or touch or taste or smell. Faith is something a bit of the unknown. And with that, there's some questions that come with that. Questions about what God's plan is for our lives. How am I doing in my Christian walk? What are my stumbling blocks? Where do I need to work on being a better person for Jesus? How can I be more? Endless questions, right? And that's not to count the ones that we have when we are reading our Bible and we come across some difficult passage and go, "What's going on here?" A lot of times we seem to be like the disciples. We don't quite understand and we're afraid to ask. So why are we so bashful to ask those questions? Why are we so afraid to ask when we don't know? I think one thing that informs that is that thing that is also talked about in this entire passage where the disciples are arguing on the road, who will be the greatest? It's that thing called pride, right? Pride gets in our way a lot of times, and pride can take many forms. It's not just the arrogance, it's like the lion, but it can take other forms. And what I'm saying by that is, I can remember in school, the teacher would get up and, of course, a lot of times they ask if there's any questions. I do this in Bible study too, and it's always my most favorite time of the whole Bible study when I, at the end, say, "Well, are there any questions, comments, or concerns?" That's exactly what happens right there. It's like crickets. Nobody wants to answer. Nobody wants to ask a question. And why don't you want to ask the question? Because you might look stupid, right? You might make a fool of yourself if you ask some question that everybody else knew, but you didn't know. And I can remember in school myself, though, I kind of had the opposite problem. I was so shy and so afraid of being wrong or being made fun of because I was wrong, I would not answer any question. I knew the answer. I knew it 9 out of 10 times. But I'd keep my mouth shut because I didn't want to be made fun of or look like a fool. Pride can get in our way, and people take that and use it to their advantage a lot of times, right? They shut down our questions or convince us that it's foolish to ask the question in the first place. And pop culture is just one of those places that this really comes out very, very strongly. Like, I'm sure you've seen, like in the movies or TV or something, or maybe you've even maybe you go to art galleries, that's your hobby. Probably not, but if it is, then you know what I'm talking about. The artist has a big show, and you go to the show, and everybody's, acting all hooty-fluty and, like the uppity, and they've got it all together, and you look at this painting, and here's a painting I'm going to show you. Got the painting up there? All right. Can you see that, sort of, kind of? And so they're all sitting in front of that painting, right? All these patrons with all this pretend money and everything, and they're all dressed up, and they're going, oh my gosh, that is so beautiful. It inspires me. It moves my heart. It makes me want to it makes me want to cry. And they go on and on and on and on. Now let's say you're one of those people that's in there. You're not hooty-fluty or anything. You're just average. And you look at this painting. Can you tell me what this painting is? Fish. No, close. Huh? A mess? This is a famous painting. It's a very religious work. You should know it. You don't know it? No idea. No. Okay, well, let me just get you off the hook. This is by a painter, and I don't know, can't pronounce his name, so I won't try. But the name of this painting is Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God. You can see that, can't you? It's plain as day now that I told you what the name of the painting is, right? Huh? They slaughtered the lamb. It's red. Well, anyway, that's what I'm talking about. Our pride, it would not allow us to just say, I have no idea what that is. And even if you knew the name of the painting, you'd go, what? You'd probably say, well, yeah, there's some white in there, and lambs are white, and then there's the blood of the lamb. Yeah, okay, yeah, I get it. How much is that? Let me write the check. No. Probably not. Pride can get in our way, and then we don't ask the questions that we should. And, is there here's another good example, just real quick. You remember that whole story about the emperor's new clothes, right? The tailor stitches up this imaginary garment and convinces the king that it's the most beautiful, valuable thing, and he's walking around naked. And it takes the bravery of a little kid in the crowd to say, hey, why is the king walking around naked? Where's our courage? Let's put our pride to the side and say, this isn't right. Or, why is this the way it is? Or, ask the questions that are tough, or not have all the answers, but we are willing to ask the questions so we can find the answer. You've heard it said 100 times, there's no stupid questions, right? You need to ask the questions. The second thing is, we might be simply afraid of the answer. Maybe the disciples, well, Jesus, you're going to die and then you're going to raise it. What do you mean you're going to die? They just didn't want to think about that, right? And we all know of questions in our lives that we are afraid of the answer. Men know this question really, really well. When their wife or girlfriend comes out of the bathroom or the bedroom and they're dressed to go out, and they look you straight in the eye and say, "Does this outfit make me look fat?" Do not answer. Do not answer. You are risking your life, gentlemen. It's beautiful. I love that outfit on you. Just say that. Sometimes we're afraid of the answer, right? So we don't ask the question, or we don't want to give a different answer. And we all know this. One of the most probably scariest times that we are afraid of the answers, like when we go to the doctor's office. I know, I won't go to the doctor's office until I'm on my deathbed because I don't want the doctor to come back and say, "Well, you have the Jing-Jong flu or whatever," right? I don't want to know that. I do not want to know that I'm sick. But what if that doctor comes back and says, "Well, you're sick, you have a terminal this or a terminal that, you have cancer"? Oh, do you really want to know the questions that follow that? A lot of times we don't ask those questions. Well, how serious is it? How long do I have? What's the treatment? What's the chances of surgery working out? How's this going to work out, Doc? I'm trusting in you. We don't ask those questions because we don't want to know the answer. Sometimes we don't ask because we're afraid of the answer. So we don't ask. But let's take it to a spiritual level here for a second. There's a pastor who shares a conversation with a colleague of his and said that this colleague said, "In 47 years of ministry, I have never had one of my parishioners or members or visitors or whatever, somebody that came to church, ask me the question, 'Well, Pastor, do you think I'm really a Christian?' Not one time did they ask, 'Well, how do you think I'm doing, as far as following Jesus? Do you think I'm doing okay? Do you think I'm growing?' Not one single time in that pastor's 47 years of ministry had someone come to ask those questions. You may think those questions sometimes, but you don't ask the question. Are you afraid of the answer? Think of another example along these lines where, we pray for God's will in our life, or we don't pray for God's will in our life because we're afraid of the answer. The answer might be, "Well, I want you to lead the youth group. I want you to teach a Sunday school class. I want you to go on a mission trip. I want you to help this person. I want you to help that person." And before you know it, we really don't want to do those things, so we don't even ask the question, "What's your will, God?" We just breeze over it. Because we know it's too scary if we got the answer that we didn't want to hear. Sometimes we're afraid of the answer. Well, the other thing is sometimes we just don't care about asking the question in the first place. Now, there's a lot of questions we're willing to ask. And we might ask in our lives, or we might ask through prayer, like, dear God, what college should I go to? Dear God, is this person right for me? Have you set this all up? Is this some divine providence that I meet this person and we get married and we live happily ever after? God, is it the right decision to buy this house? God, what about this or what about that? And we ask questions of each other all the time as well, don't we? Like, well, have you ever eaten at such and such a place? Is it good? What kind of car? What do you think about this car? What do you think about that car? What do you think about this or what do you think about that? But then there's some things that we just really don't care enough about to even ask the question. Think about that in our spiritual walk. And, it's been said that, and especially around here, there is literally a church almost on every corner, isn't there? So you can't say that there's not an opportunity for growing in your faith or whatever else. And lots of people, in fact, like 80-90% of people say that they believe in Jesus, believe in God, and all of that good stuff. But it's been said that faith in America, the American Western style faith, is about an inch deep and a mile wide. It's not really very deep. We don't really want to go too deep because, like I said before, we might be afraid of what God expects out of us. It might create a sacrifice in our lives. It might mean we have to look deep inside to figure out those blind spots that are holding us back, or those strongholds in our lives, or dare I say it, those sins that we try to hide over. So we don't really care to find out the answer to those questions. Here's a good example. There's a poem by Wilbur Reese. He says, it's called $3 Worth of God. I would like to buy $3 worth of God, please. Not enough to explode my soul or disturb my sleep, just enough to equal a warm cup of milk or a snooze in the sunshine. I don't want enough God to make me love a black man or pick beets with an immigrant. I want ecstasy, not transformation. I want warmth of the womb, not rebirth. I want a pound of the eternal in a paper sack. I'd like to buy $3 worth of God, please. You might be concerned with things of the flesh or the things of the world, and we're willing to ask questions, but how much do we care about asking the questions that concern our faith, or about our relationship with God, or about how we go deeper, how we take the next step in faith, how we grow, and we're not just sitting in a pew, but we're actually transformed into the people that God calls us to be. We talked about pride, and pride can stand in the way of our question. We talked about not asking the question because we're afraid of what the answer might be, and we talked about pride because, well, honestly, we don't care enough to ask the question. Where does that leave us? Well, let me just wrap it up with this story. One day, a father and a son went out, and they were out fishing. They were on the lake, and they had thrown their line in. They were sitting there waiting for the fish to bite. And the son says to his dad, "Dad, what exactly is keeping this boat afloat?" Dad scratched his head and said, "I don't know, son." They sat there a little bit longer, and they had a few bites, and son asked his dad, said, "Dad, how do fish breathe underwater?" "Well, son, I don't know." A little while later, fish weren't biting anymore. Son's looking up into the sky, says, "Dad, why is the sky blue?" Dad says, "I don't know." A little while passes, and the son's kind of getting nervous because he's asking a lot of questions. So he finally asks his dad the question, "Dad, am I bugging you with all these questions that I'm asking?" Dad says, "Why, no, son. Ask away. Asking questions is how we learn about things." Point is, don't let your pride get in the way. Don't let the answer scare you away from asking the question, and care enough to ask the question. Don't just be concerned with the golden ticket into heaven. Figure out how you can grow in your faith. So I ask you, are you asking the questions? Are you looking for the biblical answers? Jeremiah the prophet said this. He said, "God promised, 'Call to me and I will answer you, and I will tell you great and hidden things which you have not known.'" And Matthew, his Gospel, chapter 7, verse 7 says, Ask and it shall be given. Seek and ye shall find. Knock on the door and it will be open. So my challenge to you this morning is not to be bashful, not to be shy. Ask the question.